Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my podcast, The Intuitive Leader. And I am very happy to present to you today Jeremy Swartz. Sometimes you just know 30 minutes is not going to be enough. And this is one of those moments, as our next guest has a wealth of experience to share with us. But we're going to do it in 30 minutes, so hang on. By way of introduction, Jeremy carries over 30 years of executive experience with high-tech corporations in the telecom and financial sectors across the globe, including IBM, TIPCO, and ESW Capital. He is also an investor, active in cryptocurrency, and a specialist in mergers and acquisitions. His work has brought him literally all over the world, from Asia to the US and most of it in between. And currently, he is the CEO of TradeShield, a company using AI in the financial sector, automating the ongoing management of credit limits and balancing risks and profitability to help other businesses grow. Besides South Africa, his company is active in Mexico and the US. He graduated cum laude, that is with the highest honors, on his bachelor's degree in political science and history, and he has also studied leading global businesses at the Harvard Business School. When Jeremy is not out there building companies somewhere in the telecom, tech, or financial sector, he enjoys outdoor living or is sailing on his boat. Currently, he is living in South Africa with his family. Jeremy considers himself to be an intuitive leader, and I promise you a fascinating talk on topics such as intuition, leadership, psychological safety, and the act of failing. Jeremy, such a pleasure to have you on.
Maurice, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, and this is such an interesting moment to speak to you. So let's dive straight into it. According to you, let's get the definition out of the way. What is intuition?
Intuition is really a sum total of instinct, being able to understand energy, being able to make decisions based on experience. And a lot of it, I think, is actually hard to define, Maurice, because some people tend to be more in tune with intuition than others. And so I've seen a definition of intuition that says it's not a rational or something that you can actually practice or get better at. It's almost a native ability to be able to understand an energy flow or a situation or a person without cognitive or rational data. I believe some of that to be true, but I also believe that intuition is something that we're all blessed with. But unfortunately, we don't spend enough time when we're young engaging with that sense and trusting it enough. So I think it's a complex and interesting subject. And from a leadership point of view, we're going to get into some more detail in the course of this morning's chat. But it's a very powerful tool to be used when you're dealing with humans, or especially in complex situations which require sound judgment. So for me, it's a sum total of experience, instinct, and really leaning in to what your senses are telling you. I hope that's a useful definition, but that's my thought on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, it is. It is. You already mentioned a couple of moments there in terms of decisions, relationships. In general, when at work do you, as being the CEO of your company, when do you use intuition? In what circumstances?
All the time, really. I think particularly when there is a complex situation involving competing interests in a room, so whether it's an internal or a customer-facing situation, when you're going into a room or when you are faced with a lot of data. And I think sometimes, in the world that we live in now, we tend to set a very high store on cognitive ability, on emotional intelligence, being able to analyze data. All of that is true. But there is a huge tool at our disposal, which is that native ability to be able to understand things sometimes beyond the numbers and beyond the data. I do think it's very much like a muscle. It's something that you need to lean into, something one needs to practice. And the more you practice, the more you're able to trust that. So to give you an example, if I'm walking into a room, if it's a large presentation, or if I'm giving a presentation or a speech, one example of that is being able to read a room. And we use that expression a lot, read a room. What does it mean? It's really to understand not just what is happening, but why it's happening and what the forces are at play in a particular given situation. And there was a wonderful quote that I read many years ago, which really has been such a watchword for me. it's over 2,000 years ago. Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor Marcus Aurelius,
Mm,
spoke about in his book on living and dying and living the good life. He uses a great quote where he says, "Of all things, understand what is its nature, simplicity, the basics." And for me, that's a
mm,
huge input with regards to intuition, because sometimes we can be overwhelmed with data.
mm,
Sometimes the numbers and the information can be quite overwhelming, and really understanding what is this person's core, or what is the situation's core, where's the flow or the energy going in the situation. And if one takes the time and the trouble to try and understand that a little bit, you move out of what I call reaction. If we're not thinking like using our
mm,
intuition, we tend to just respond to the surface information, or we feel defensive sometimes, or we don't really listen to what's going on because we just want waiting for a gap so that we can talk. That kind
mm,
of
mm,
poor communication behavior. Where what I find with intuition, which is so interesting, is I find it a calming thing. I tend to get excited. I think I have quite a
mm.
Mediterranean personality, so I use my hands, and I like to be emotional. What I found intuition helps me
Mm,
with is to slow down a little bit mentally, to sometimes let a silence be a silence, and to give myself time to process and analyze what my intuition in my tummy is telling me. Whereas if you're not thinking like that, I find I tend to be operating at a very shallow level, just in terms of almost like give and take, boom, boom,
yeah,
question, answer, instead of taking time to
yeah.
understand, where is this coming from? What am I reading here? What should I be thinking about? Does that make sense?
Interesting. Yeah, very much. And if I summarize it with, it helps you stay strategic, keep the overview.
I think that's a fair point. In my experience, in certainly in my life, my experience is that women tend to be far more strategic than men, and I've seen
Mm,
that in the business world. They tend to be better gatherers of information and being able to process a lot wider spectrum, whereas men, we tend to be more linear, very focused. We're good at that, and neither of these things is good or bad, but I think
mm,
really getting in touch with that almost female energy, that strategic
mm.
thinking of allowing your senses to be open to things coming from around you, not just on this narrow vision that we tend to sometimes focus on, is really helpful. So I think that's a good definition, Maurice. Strategic thinking rather than just being locked in the tactical moment. I think that's a good definition of that.
All right. Interesting, interesting. And given the fact that you are CEO of your company today, the whole corporate experience that you've had in your life right now, and from a previous talk to you, I believe you mentioned to me that you were almost looking to go and retire, but you couldn't help yourself to jump on the next project here. But with all this luggage you have, all this experience you have, where does your intuition come from, in a sense? Like, how come you are in touch with your intuition, and what triggered it, or where did that start? Just curious about the journey behind where you are today.
That's a great question. I think it starts. I'm a very curious person. I've always been very curious. I
Mm,
read voraciously, so I have a very active mind. And I think early on in my career as a manager, when I was a lot younger, I found that oftentimes when there were stressful situations, or situations that required calm, rational thought, that were perhaps emotional or tense, I didn't perform at the level that I would have expected of myself. And so it started, really, the journey was a journey of discovery for me. So I started reading. I read some really fantastic books, um, which informed my view around what great leaders do, and what makes great leadership. And I do want to stress that leadership is not linked, in my view, to a title. I think all of us can be leaders, and we all need to be followers as well. I think all of us
yeah,
report in some way, shape, or form to somebody, and so leadership sometimes can be a bit of a misused word, because we link it to a title, or having power, or people that report to us, etc. But leadership really is around getting things done, and using the resources, whether those are human resources or other tools, to be able to get things done. So we're all, we can all be leaders. But to answer the question, it started with a journey of discovery. And what I found in my reading and in my studies was that the folks that do really well in corporate life are able to see a big picture, to be able to see the larger forces at play, and to be able to, first of all, understand them, and then understand how to harness them. And I was very fortunate, as part of my journey, to have a manager that I, to this day, stay in touch with, who's a profoundly deep thinker and a fantastic leader. And I asked him to mentor me, just with regards to the way that he would handle some of these situations. So for me, it was a combination of really learning at the hand of a master, being open to that learning, and the generosity that he extended to me by giving of his time. And it's a journey, Maurice. You don't
Yeah.
suddenly these don't suddenly click into place. But one thing I do want to stress as part of our chat this morning, it doesn't quite link to intuition, but it very much links to leadership, and something I really would like to get out into the world, is concept of paying it forward, of not holding on to knowledge or experience, sharing what you have as a larger energy flow. That example of throwing the pebble into a pond and the ripples spreading out across.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I have learned deeply in my life, is not to cling on to knowledge or to power, but to make it freely available. Be a force for good. So all of us in our various ways have experiences that we've gone through, that we've hopefully learned from, and sharing that with whoever asks or whoever benefits from it, I think is a very healthy thing. And so, when it comes to journeys of discovery, all of us have a path. And I think it behooves all of us, especially as leaders, to freely make ourselves available to share our learnings with one another.
That's fantastic. And it's my observation that you are doing that right now. You are paying it forward, just like you had your mentor. You are now sharing your experience and your expertise. So you are doing that, and I'm grateful for that. So that's good news.
That's well put. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, and I think there's a humility that comes with that as well. All of us are human. All of us make mistakes. And I know a little bit later in our chat we're going to talk a little bit about failure. I'd love to share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I
But
can do it now. That's fine. Yeah.
sure, but just the art of engaging with other humans and being able to listen, being able to learn, to be able to share. There's a much larger energy flow that all of us are connected to. And when we don't use intuition, when we are selfish, when we are all about ourselves, or all about a very linear, specific goal, for me, those are all things that disqualify us from the bigger picture of what we're doing on the planet. And I think when you speak to people who are happy and content, there really is a notion of, I think, where we find real meaning as human beings is when we give, and in whatever form giving takes, whether it be to other people or to, planting a forest or helping animals, whatever it is. But when we engage in selfless acts, there is tremendous meaning that we find as humans. And so part of this knowledge sharing that I'm talking about, for me, is a part of that narrative, is to be able to help the larger group, almost from a primitive point of view. How do we help our tribe to be better, to learn, to grow, etc. And failure is part of that. I think you and I had an interesting chat a couple of weeks ago about failure. Maybe we can segue into that a little bit later, but I'll be keen to hear your thoughts on what you've come across with other leaders that you've spoken to. What have you come across with regards to
in terms of failure?
Sure.
Yeah. So none of them have expressed it so well as you did, in the sense that how you talked about failure and the lessons learned from that. So, but I think I've interviewed maybe 30 or so leaders, many of them CEOs, on, let's say, psychological safety, trust, the building of culture in a company. And most of these people that I had on my call, they were very open for these topics. they recognize the importance of creating safety and establishing trust, and by not punishing people. So that seems to be the common thread, at least among those people that I've had. I've had the honor to interview, if you like.
Right.
But you had a very crisp way of looking at it, sharp. You're very welcome to share it.
Sure. So I think in our culture, failure has a very bad reputation, a bad rap. We think failure is bad and succeeding is good. And in my view, we have a motto that we use in our
Mm.
business, which is we either want to win or we want to learn.
Yep.
So making mistakes or failing, we see as a very negative experience. And my experience is counter to that. I think if one can be humble and learn from the painful things that all of us go through, so we leave behind things like resentment and anger and self-doubt and self-hatred and all these things that can psychologically take place when we don't achieve a goal, or if we quote
Mm.
unquote fail. It doesn't need to be a scarring experience. And I wish we taught this better in our schools, from a young age.
Mm.
Because
Mm.
in the school system, we prize success, the person that comes first. Where in terms of life lessons, some of
Yep.
the most important things that I have learned have come through really having failed. And I think the really key thing for me as a leader is failure for me can be a very positive thing, but making the same mistake twice is not good. So,
No.
if we in a
No.
situation where I think oftentimes what you'll find with founders or people that are very engaged in a business from a leadership point of view, there's a lot of micromanagement that can take place because the sense is that I've been here before, I know better. Let me jump in here quickly and stop you from making a mistake. Hold on a second, let me come and fix this, And I've seen this play out many, many times. And one of the difficult things to do as a leader is to allow your people around you to have the same benefit of that experience that you had, which is to fail and not to feel like their job or their reputation or their safety. You used an interesting phrase, psychological safety it's at risk. Because when you put a fear of failure into people, then a couple of bad things happen. Number one, people stop thinking for themselves. Now
Mm.
it's just as if I'm going to wait for Maurice to tell me what to do because I don't want to fail, because if I fail, bad things are going to happen. I'll be reprimanded publicly. I will maybe lose my job, whatever it may be. So I'm not even going to experiment or try anything because that can have a very bad experience for me. So I don't do it. So I go into my safe zone. I sometimes call it the nodding head syndrome. Have you ever sat in a big meeting and the boss is talking and everybody's just sitting there nodding their heads? It's
Yep.
it's not a good thing. So you want to encourage people to try things.
Mm.
You want to give them that safety net to be able to fail and learn, and in that learning provide tremendous additional value to the organization or the group going forward, that there's an experience that we learn from. Whereas if we are only in a situation where we prize success, then you'll find that the organization becomes very rigid and stagnates. And so sometimes that very difficult thing is to be able to step back and allow
Mm.
someone the
Mm.
benefit of failing so that they can actually grow and learn, and knowing that you support them, I think is very powerful. And I've seen that work really well.
Mm. To me, that sounds like it's building trust, not just trust between, let's say, leadership and everybody else, but also trust within humans, trust within the team or within an employee to actually dare to take a risk, but also to trust their own judgment or their own decision making. And okay, it went bad the last time, it turned south the last time. I
Hmm.
did I did it in the wrong way, maybe, but I've learned from it. I'm now going to do it in a different way. So I'm going to succeed this time, or at least become better at it. And that builds trust. You're building up people from the inside. That's how it sounds to me.
You're right. And you know where it starts? It starts in the hiring process. Maurice, you literally want to make sure that when you are in hiring mode, when you are recruiting and looking for candidates for your organization, the key thing for me really is it's about fit. So it's not whether the person is a good person or a bad person, or you think they're great or not great. It's really does this human being that you are engaging with, do
Mm.
they do you feel that there will be an interchange of good energy or a good fit on both sides? Oftentimes we think of interviewing as the interviewer sitting on the pedestal and the person below sort of hoping that they're going to get the job. And
Begging for the job, yeah.
yes, exactly. I tend to do interviews very differently. It's really a conversation to understand from both sides, is there value in doing something together, or is this not a potentially a good fit? And so when you start with that process, I've spoken about this at conferences, I've written about this, but for me, when I'm hiring, I look for qualities in the human being rather than years of experience or degrees, etc., on a CV. Now, of course, people need to be competent, so that has to be the starting block. But things that I look for when I'm engaging with candidates in the hiring process for any job, I look for things like positive mental attitude. I look for things like proven hard worker. I look for people who are keen to learn and to grow. I look for examples of unselfishness. And when you look for, in other words, you're hiring for character. And when you surround yourselves with people that share those values, you can teach skills, you can train people that can make mistakes. But if you've got a good human or good humans with solid characteristics like I've outlined,
Yeah.
my dad used to call it grit, that ability to be able
Yeah.
to keep your head down, work through the tough times, get things done. When you look for examples of that, I'll give you a true life example of when I'm hiring. Something that I find very interesting is I look and see, did this person put themselves through excuse me, their degree or their initial tertiary education themselves? Did they do, for instance, a correspondence degree? That's a very interesting one for me, because if somebody has gone through the university experience, as an example, and put themselves through long distance learning, that for me is a very strong indicator of desire, of grit, of character, and of hard work. Because typically those people are doing a full-time job, they're having to do the degree separately. Typically they've had to finance it themselves. Their parents haven't just put them through university when they're 18 years old. So and this is an example of where data can feed intuition. So these little nuggets that you look for and you say, this is interesting. Maurice did this and this and this. He had a newspaper route when he was 10. Interesting. Because that's hard work, right? That's a little kid getting on his bicycle every day, delivering. There's a lot of responsibility there. Little things like that for me are very telling, rather than saying, hey, I've got this 4 year in degrees from university. And I think when you look for examples of those kinds of characteristics, building an organization becomes a very joyous experience. You mentioned at the beginning of the introduction how I was, this time last year, I was semi-retired, but I find something that's so important in life, Maurice, is to have a love for the work. So sometimes it's not even about the result, but the joy of being in the battle, with the troops, building, growing, scaling, learning, all of that stuff. It starts with love, actually. And if you don't love what you do, if you don't love the people around you and want to do your best for them, it can be a very stressful experience. So I find that although there are lots of complex things in my work, I don't ever feel negative stress about it, although I can certainly get tired, but it's not a joyless experience going to work. For me, it's a very joyous thing going to work. And, I'd love to share that thought to whoever listens to this podcast, is find whatever it is for you that you love doing, whatever it is, not what your parents tell you, or what you think your friends expect, or what society expects. Find something that you enjoy doing on a daily basis. And that is such a secret of life, rather than stuck in a career where you hate your job, you're resentful, stressful. It can lead to all sorts of bad things.
Yeah, you said so many interesting things here in the last 5 or so minutes. There's so many things I want to react on or respond to, or just comment on some one way or the other. In minding of time, I will pick out 2 only. So one of them is that this is actually very funny. I wasn't 10, but I was 14, I believe. I started to work though when I was 11, but in a different way. But when I was 14, I actually did the newspaper thing that you mentioned. It was quite funny. And then you spoke about
And you
people
know what, Maurice?
finding,
So did
yeah,
I. Interestingly, I
yeah,
also had a newspaper route when I was a little boy. So that's an interesting thing we've got in common. That's great.
early up in the morning, right? There were tough mornings sometimes when it was raining. So yeah, and people finding that true purpose or true meaning or what I love to do in life. That's where intuition comes in. By the way, I thought that's just a side note.
That's a very
So
powerful point. Yeah, and I think just to finish off on that, and I am
yeah,
conscious of time,
yeah,
is really to. I was watching an interesting YouTube video just the other day of Jerry Seinfeld giving the commencement address at Duke University. Um, and one of the things that he said was very interesting was pay attention. And I think that that plays nicely into the whole subject matter of intuition is you really need to be paying attention. So when you're being an active listener, using your eyes, your ears, your senses, listening to what's happening in your tummy with what's going on, but you really need to lean into that. It's not just going to happen if you're just sitting there in your own head. And it's very much like a muscle for me. And the more that you lean into that, the more you trust it, and the more you trust it, the better experience you'll have. And what I find great about doing that is it gives me tremendous confidence to be able to feel relaxed in a difficult situation, to say, I've been here before. So for me, intuition is a calming influence. Without intuition, we can get caught up very much in the emotion or the distractions, and then we make bad decisions. So for me, paying attention is super important.
yeah. That's a very good bridge to my next question, if you like. It's regarding how do you experience intuition? How do you know this is my intuition talking to me? What happens on the inside? What is your sensation, or what's the inner experience in within Jeremy?
That's such a great question. And the answer is, for me, it's a
Mm,
little bit like butterflies in the tummy. So for me, when something isn't quite right, I get a literal fluttering in my belly. And that is almost a primeval thing saying, alert, heads up, something here is not quite what it should be. And when I was a younger man, I used to dismiss that. The
yep,
older I've
me
got,
too.
the more I thought, this is really important. So I lean in. But physically, it's literally a tingling in my belly. I'm not sure if that, I'm very curious to hear other answers to that question. Is that something unusual or strange, or have you heard that before?
No, it's actually for me extremely usual. I have the same thing. Is for me, it's a tingling in the belly. It's a flare up. It's a flare up from my stomach or belly area right through my chest, if you like, to my throat, and it can either be positive or negative depending on what it is. But it's the same triactum, if you like. I've heard others saying a sensation within the chest area. I've heard others saying a sensation within the head area. So I interviewed also one professor, and I had also one person on my course that described sensation in the head area. I've heard others saying heart area, and again others mentioning a whole body experience. So something within the body tells them. Unclear where it's actually located, but it is somewhere within the body. So the
And I think
holistic experience of
that's so interesting. And I think a large part of the challenge with people not trusting intuition or using intuition in our culture is that we tend to focus very much in the head or the intellect. So I find that's a challenge constantly for me, is to get out of my head. We were just talking before the show tonight about the fact that I've recently been on holiday, and I think one of the comments that I made was that I found that when I take time out, I get out of my head and I get into my body more. And that's the constant learning for me around trusting the body and getting into the body, not just being in the head. Because when we're just in the head, these influences or alerts that are probably
yeah,
programmed in from thousands of years ago, we suppress them to a certain degree because it's all about the intellect or the data in
yeah,
the head. And for me, the real magic, Maurice, comes when we marry those two together, the head and the body. It's not that one is good and one is bad. It's being able to meld that, which is super
yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Completely with you there. My the logo of my company, the Intuitive Leader, has a set of brains, left and right, right. So I'm curious when you said that when something is wrong, when you have that tingling of those butterflies in your stomach, and it's telling you something is off, something is not right. Do you have an example, like a real life example, in private or in business, where you felt your intuition telling you, well, I shouldn't do this, or but you went against it. You went against your intuition, despite your intuition telling you something, you didn't do it. Do you have an example of that?
I have more than one, but I'll just share one with you for sure. So it was a
Mhm.
number of years ago, and I think it was very much around the concept of that linear progression that we spoke about before. So I was in the sales role. We were chasing a particular transaction. We were competing with other companies in very much you know, a zero sum game. You know, somebody wins, somebody loses kind of game. And I was presenting to a large group of people, and I had my presentation worked out, and we'd realized that we would need to partner with another company. And so there had been some conversations earlier around strengthening our bid with another partner. So in the room, we were talking with the potential partner, and just from the first couple of questions and statements that were made, interestingly, just before the session started. So it was me
Mm.
listening to the conversations around me. I got a sense that this was not the right partnership for us. There were different values being exhibited there. And oftentimes it can be in jest. You know, people make comments in jest. You know, a therapist will always tell you this, you know, when someone makes some side remark, that's the real meat, you know. And so the sense that I got was that we should not be doing this. This is not a partnership that would be good for us. It looked like there were different things that were
Mm.
important to this group than to us. But because I was all about the deal, I was all about trying to win, we went ahead and we ended up having a very negative experience, which ended up in the law courts actually. But fundamentally, it was a case of being expedient, saying, I'm not going to listen to my intuition because I need this thing to get this thing that's in front of me done. So it's almost like the end justifies the means.
Yeah.
And I have
Yeah.
learned to my cost in life that very seldom does the end justify the means. The means are where it's at, actually. And so that for me is a great example of a bad situation that I potentially saw coming. My intuition said this is not where we should be playing. Went ahead
Yeah.
anyway and reaped the consequences. But having just to finish off on that thought, Maurice, that's a very powerful learning. So as much as that was a negative
Mm.
experience, I'm able
Mm.
to talk about it now, and I often look back to that and be able to say, there's a great example of not following my intuition. So let's not do that again.
And would you say that that was a cost, or was it in any way beneficial to go ahead and make that transaction together with that partner? You ended up in in a lawsuit, I believe. But was this a plus or a minus for your company at the time?
It was a plus initially because we won the transaction.
Yep.
The long-term effects were negative.
Yeah. But the short-term salesman has a plus, I guess.
Exactly. And there's a whole other subject which we could talk about another time, but really just about this whole notion that we have around being outcomes based. So it's all about the target, the goal, the delivery, all the rest. And one of the other things that I've learned in my life is really around the value of high quality inputs of work,
Mm.
focusing on really quality work and letting the outcomes take care of themselves. Where we only focus on an outcome, all sorts of bad behavior can open up to justify the goal. Um,
The
so a huge,
shortcuts.
sure. So a huge part of my leadership style is really around building high quality processes. How do we define high quality work? We have things called quality bars in our business, which is literally how do we map a great process and continually tweak that with the confidence to say, if we do these things really well on the input side, the outputs will take care of themselves. So there's a bit of trust that's involved in doing that,
Mm.
especially for people who start in the organization. They haven't thought like that before. But I find it enormously powerful to be able to think like that. And it's a very powerful way to get human beings to focus on the important things.
So now I'm curious about your experience when you actually went with your intuition. You have a very strong intuitive mind, a very strong intuitive signal, a flare up in your stomach. So my guess is that this is happening on a regular basis, on a daily basis with you. Do you have an example where you went with your gut, with your intuition, and but not just any, where it was a little bit scary? Because it's my experience that intuition is not necessarily there to keep you in your comfort zone. It's not necessarily there to make you feel just warm, happy, balanced, and as you said earlier, just sit on on your chair and that it will come to you. It's very much related to getting you out of your comfort zone and doing stuff that maybe are a little bit scary, but not paralyzing you with fear. It's there is this pull, if you like, towards something that that isn't necessarily easy to do, but
Right.
still the right thing to do. Do you have an example in your life from that?
I've got a great example actually. It's something fairly personal, which I will share, and it has to do with the relationship with my wife. So when we were still dating, we were very early on in our relationship, and I did or said something that really annoyed her. I remember that we were at my house, and she got really annoyed, and I'm sure I said something that I shouldn't have said or did something I shouldn't have done, and off she walked out to her car, and I was sort of feeling quite resentful of that, and I'd been a single guy for a long time, and sometimes that single mindset is very much like, well, it didn't work out, there's plenty of fish in the sea, to hell with it. And as she walked out, I remember I had this very uncomfortable feeling in my tummy, and it was literally a voice that said, don't let her go.
Ooh.
You need to go and apologize. You need to fix this, and you have to do it right now. This is not something that's going to wait for tomorrow or later this evening. This is one of those moments where you've got to swallow your pride, because this person is special. And so I literally went out, stopped the car from leaving in the driveway, swallowed my pride, and it's the best thing I've ever done in my life. And I'm happily married. We're sort of 25 years down the line. But that was a pivotal moment for me, where it would have been so easy to just go, the hell with it, And I'm so glad that I listened to my intuition. It was not comfortable. It was not easy. But the benefits and the joy that we've both reaped from me listening to my intuition, I think are very powerful. So that's a personal example, but I think hopefully it shows the point, right?
Yeah, it's very and thank you for sharing that. It's very compelling and gripping, to be honest. I could feel the emotions behind it, but it's also there's an urging in it, right? There's an intensity in it. If I hear you correctly, it wasn't like a soft voice telling you, just give it a try. No, it was an urging voice, right here, right now.
For sure. And I think something else that is worth just highlighting with intuition as a general, we talk about listening to intuition, tuning into intuition, but oftentimes that intuition is going to compel us to do something that is not necessarily comfortable. And I think I love the way that you highlighted that, actually, because we sometimes feel that it's always warm and fuzzy and it's easy and comfortable. It's a little bit like we talk about soulmates in this life. You connect with certain people. And that's not always a warm, fuzzy Hollywood ending kind of thing. Sometimes soulmates are people that really challenge you. You can be really annoyed, but you understand that there's a personal growth element, and there's someone that really gets you. And intuition is very similar. There are times when intuition is going to compel us to do something that is very uncomfortable, but we realize it's the right thing to do. And that's the experience, I think, that comes over time, is that it's not always going to just be something that's easy, quite the opposite sometimes.
No, and this is so interesting that you're mentioning this, because I don't know why, but this is the right thing to do. Or I don't know why, but this is the wrong thing to do. I've been in those situations myself, even in business moments where I did not have the data. I couldn't prove it, if you like. There was no logical way of arguing, but I knew it was wrong or I knew it was right. And in my younger years, I basically remained silent. Later on, I started to speak up more and more. But what I realized is that there's so much tacit knowledge in us. And if we would look at your career and your background, all those I don't know how many decisions you have made in your life. I mean, we all do, but from a business point of view, you've made thousands of executive decisions all over your years, from hiring people to investing somewhere, the cryptocurrency. There are so many experiences of baked in within you that sipple through when you speak now or when you are making decisions for your company. And my wonder is a little bit, how can we, or if you were to advise another CEO, let's say a younger CEO or some person that has built a company, was a startup, it's now a scale up, he's now a CEO, but he doesn't have your experience. So if you would sort of, well, the way I'm thinking is, what if we could extract all that tacit knowledge from you and incorporate it in a, let's say, decision-making process or a mentoring process, if you like, for a younger CEO. So basically the question is, if you were to codify, if you like, how you make decisions, including intuition, just not the whimsy, impulsive ones, but the ones that actually are well thought through and grounded within your true intuition, how would that look like? I guess this could be like an hour on itself, but anyway, I'm
It
curious how
could be.
you would codify it. Yeah.
It's a great question. If I think about the big decisions, the tough decisions, intuition is a part of it, but it's not the only part of it. I think it's valuable that you said that, because it's not all just flying by the seat of your pants or listening to the intuition. Intuition is hugely a part of it. So when it comes to decision making, I think the best way that I can articulate that, Maurice, is to typically, what is my experience? So first of all, I try and there is typically the physical component. Is my gut telling me something about this? What I will typically do then, if I have the time and it's not in the room, in the moment kind of situation, I will look for data to support or not. I will lean into my own experience to say, have I been in situations like this before? Does this remind me of something? Is this similar to a situation or a decision that I've had to face before, which is a benefit of experience? I tap into the people around me, and there's a key point here, which I think is a subject for a whole other day, but it's also around tapping into other people's intuition, and trusting that, which is a very interesting thing. So it's literally taking soundings from the people around, in my case, around me, to say, hey, here's the situation. What are your initial thoughts, without going into analysis paralysis mode? What do you think? And being open to other people's intuition, I think, is a very interesting subject as well. And I think that plays to the point about me sharing some of my thoughts today. But it's not always about just your thing in the world. It's being able to feed off the energy and thoughts and experiences of the human beings around you and allowing them to be able to contribute to that. So typically, when it comes to codifying a decision-making process, I try and look for the bigger picture. So the cryptocurrency is an interesting one, and that's, once again, a whole subject for another day. But one of the decisions, one of the reasons why I got involved in that was, I understand that right now it's very much a Wild West kind of scenario. There's all sorts of horror stories going on. But rising above all of that, the bigger picture here is, I think that there is a democratization process happening with regards to the movement of money. In the big scheme of things, in terms of where the world is going, personal opinion, of course, is that the banks have had all this power, and when it comes to funding and access to capital, etc., and that is changing. There's a democratization process happening. It's painful, as things always are when there's a sea change or a shift. But I think it's where, based on the information and the people that I've spoken to and the research that I've done, is that this is something where the world is going. This is a movement. This is something that's going on. There's a flow here. And so for me, that's really interesting. Want to be involved in part of that. And so one thing I try and do when I'm making a big decision is try and understand, get out of the initial situation that I'm in and say, is this part of a bigger thing? So if it's a partnership or a merger or an acquisition, does this fit into a flow of where we're going, where they're going, where the world is going? And if it isn't, then I need to think very seriously, excuse me, about that, because going against flow, not understanding how the flow is working, is very painful. I think all of us experienced that. We've chased a relationship where it clearly there was no real connection there, but we just carried on anyway because we wanted to, to have that relationship or close that deal or whatever. and your tummy is saying this is not a good thing, that there doesn't feel like there's a connection here, but we do it anyway. So I think there's almost a Zen-like thing, Maurice, as well, as part of my decision-making process, which is to take a step back and understand what is the energy around what we're trying to do here. So I'll give you an interesting example of something that we're busy with at work right now, which is we're in expansion mode. Our business is growing. There are obviously dangers to that as well, because oftentimes you can scale too quickly and things can break. And so we've had to make a big decision about the financial year that we're currently in. Where is our big focus going to be? And there was a lot of competing thoughts around that. Should we be putting a lot of money into offshore, etc.? And when we thought about it, we investigated that, and because we'd grown so quickly over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, we found that there was what we call technical debt. So there were things that were in our platform that had not been really robustly built because we were moving quickly to deliver something in the past. And so we took a big decision at the end of last year to have a huge focus on really ensuring that our local customers, in my case in South Africa, we're delighting them, and that our platform is so robust that it's ready for exponential growth. And so there was a slowing down in a way of some of the sort of world domination kind of thinking around really getting the basics and the fundamentals in place. And the energy that I was trying to lean into there was to earn your right, or to earn your place at the table. So we never wanted to go into a whole lot of new markets, and we weren't quite there. We were 80% there. So for me, that was really interesting, how that decision became very intuitive, which was, I don't feel like we should be going too quickly, too fast. And so we made a decision to focus our resources and energies and so on in terms of eliminating technical debt, etc. So for me, that was a very interesting discussion and debate, because my intuition said, if we grow too quickly, which the world tends to prize, everybody wants to talk about the unicorns and these businesses that go from 0 to $100 million in 2 years, and we get caught up in that energy, and that's not necessarily good for the staff or the customers. And so for me, that was an interesting decision that became quite obvious that my intuition was taking me to, but we looked into the data.
Yeah, don't try to run before you can walk, kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
By the way, Jeremy, we can cut this out. Maybe I think there's someone trying to reach you. Should we mute it for a second? Just for a second, then we can close off.
Sorry, just a meeting request that came in. So do you want to just go back and answer that question again? Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. Sorry. It's just another meeting. Sorry. Let's jump back in.
Okay. Yeah. So it's just moving towards close off time, unfortunately, because we could easily talk for another hour, I believe.
Sure.
So if you would say, in short, according to you, if you would summarize it and boil it down, like, why would other CEOs need to take care of their intuition or listen to their intuition?
It's really a tool in our armory. It's a massive weapon on the battlefield to be able to use. This thing that we call intuition is something that I think has been primed and evolved over thousands of years in human beings. It's linked to survival, I believe. When instincts are telling you something, like, look to your left, there may be a bear or a lion coming at you. And that survival instinct has been honed over a long period of time. So my advice would be, ignore your intuition at your peril, because it's there for a reason. And it's enormously powerful. So lean into it, trust it. And the more you do that, the more confident you will feel going forward to make decisions based on what your body is telling you, and to stay alert. So I would also just add that intuition, I think, is very much like a muscle. Certainly it is for me, that you spend time, you pay attention, you listen, you engage your senses, and you lean in. It's not just going to be something sitting in your chair while you're talking and knowing what to do. So I think you need to respect it, respect your intuition, respect other people's intuition, and understand that it's there for a reason. And as much as we prize intelligence and IQ and data and the world that we live in from a business perspective, which is all of this is important, is the human component is so critical. Humans invented computers, not the other way around. And so
Mm.
understand that there's enormous power in these senses that we have, and to be able to utilize that is a very powerful thing and a very joyous thing. And I think when we get it right, we'll find, excuse me, we'll find that good decisions result from understanding flow.
Fantastic. Jeremy, on that note, I would like to give you a big thanks for being my guest today. It's really fascinating listening to you. I've learned so many new things, and I hope my listeners as well.
Thank you very much for having me. I feel like we could talk for a lot longer, but I really appreciate being able to spend some time with you today, Maurice, and hopefully it's been valuable and interesting for everyone listening.
It is. It definitely was. Definitely. So, to everybody else listening and viewing, if you find our conversation intriguing, which I'm sure you find, please know you can participate. Register for free on our free community for intuitive leaders, where you can have the opportunity to have interactive sessions with me, among other Q&As on intuition and leadership. Go to intuitiveleader.net/podcast and scroll all the way down. You'll find the link here below as well. Thank you for watching. Thank you for viewing, and see you soon back.
Thank you, Maurice.